Hi guys, welcome to CADS 3853 module number 8. The topic of this module is going to be maintain markup as one of the 3 types of markups that we are talking about. Again, this is the same slide that we saw in the previous 2 modules as well. It just introduces the 3 types of markup. We've already taken a look at the initial markup and cumulative markup in the previous 2 modules, and today is going to be about the maintain markup. The initial markup and cumulative markup both were a planned markup that we talked about it, and because the both uses the original retail or planned retail price or retail value as the retail part of the markup calculation, and build cost or cumulative build cost as the cost part of the markup calculation. The original retail and build cost are both planned figures or the initial figures, cost and retail figures, whereas maintain markup is now going to be about the actual markup that you achieve based on the actual operation that has happened. As is with any markup is retail minus cost. So I said it is what retail and what cost that we're using to calculate the markup that determines the different types of markup. For maintain markup, like I said, it is an actual retail and actual cost values that we are going to use to calculate markup. So the actual retail basically means the actual retail price that we charge the customer. Okay, so that translates in as the net sales, right? Net sales are the actual dollars that the customers pay to buy the merchandise from our store. So net sales are going to be our retail figure. And then the cost, what's the actual cost? And we use the gross cost of merchandise sold. We learned this term earlier when we talked about different intermediary steps to reach or to calculate cost of goods sold. And gross cost of merchandise sold is basically the cost of goods sold prior to cash discount, alteration cost were taken into account. So basically all the costs of all the merchandise that you sell, okay, but we do not think about the cash discounts and alteration and workroom cost yet. Okay, so this gross cost is essentially it's the same as the build cost of the all the merchandise that you sold, plus if you had to pay any transportation, that will be part of the cost. Okay, cash discount and alteration workroom costs, we don't think about these kind of things in this context yet, although we want to use the actual cost for the maintain markup. Cash discount maybe sometimes reimbursed later, or alteration of workroom costs may or may not occur depending on the merchandise. So unless you calculate maintain markup all the way to at the end of the season, you may not have a clear figure about the cash discount amount or alteration of workroom cost yet. So, but we know the build cost of the merchandise that we sold, as well as any transportation that we already paid to get this merchandise in our store. So those two components of the cost of goods sold we already know. So we are going to use this part of the cost as the gross cost of merchandise sold to calculate the maintain markup. And as I said already, maintain markup is the actual markup that we achieve. So it's not a planned figure, but it's going to be an achieved figure based on the actual sales, net sales that have occurred, as well as the cost that we have already paid, build cost and transportation. If we do have any transportation, then transportation has to be part of this gross cost. If we didn't pay any transportation, all the vendors paid all the transportation, which is great. In that case, gross cost will be equal to build cost, the same cost that we used for the calculation of the initial markup or cumulative markup. Maintain markup percent, again, when we turn maintain markup dollar into maintain markup percent, markup percent is percent of retail, so you have to use a retail figure as the denominator. And in this case, the retail figure is net sales, right? So because of that reason, maintain markup percent is expressed as a percent of net sales. Knowing that maintain markup percent is percent of net sales, so maintain markup dollar over net sales dollar, let's think about its relationship with the IMU, the initial markup. Okay, the relationship between initial markup and the maintained markup is very important. Let's take a look at this kind of diagram, kind of visually describing what initial markup actually means, and then we're going to take a look at what maintained markup is as well. So let's say, think about a case where the original retail price was $10. Let's think about it like a t-shirt or something like that. This t-shirt original retail dollar was $10. Okay, and the cost that we paid to buy this t-shirt from the vendor was $6. Okay? If my original retail price is $10 and the cost is $6, then the initial markup will be $4, the difference between the original retail and the cost. Right? And this makes the initial markup percent to be, which is initial markup dollar over original retail dollar, to be 40%. Okay, $4 initial markup divided by the original retail dollar of 10, right? Then let's say we took a reduction of $1 on this t-shirt. The reductions include markdowns and discounts and shortages. So let's say we took a markdown of $1. Okay, then what would be the maintained markup? When we take a $1 markdown reduction, now the net sales is going to be $9. If we sell this item with the reduction of $1, we can get only $9 from the customer. So our net sales becomes $9 instead of the original retail price of $10. Okay, and this gives us the maintained markup of only $3, right? Because our maintained markup is net sales minus cost, right? So the difference between the net sales and cost will be our markup that we can actually maintain. Okay, initial markup was planned to be $4, but because of the reduction, now we're going to maintain only a $3 markup. Okay, in this case, the maintained markup percent will be the maintained markup dollar divided by the net sales dollar, so 3 over 9, which will be 33.33%. Now we're seeing the difference between the IMU percent and MMU percent in a sense that with the $1 reduction out of the $10 original retail, the original IMU percent was $40, but now we are maintaining only 33.33% of the markup as our maintained markup. Now this simple example illustrates a lot of different formulas or ways to think about the relationship between the IMU and MMU, as well as all these other components that we are seeing in this slide. For example, we can see that we can maybe be able to make a formula such as like original retail equals net sales plus reductions, right? Original retail of $10 equals the net sales of $9 plus the reduction of $1. Right? And from that, we can also derive another formula like net sales equals original retail minus reductions. Well, how do we calculate net sales? That's taking off the reduction from the original retail, right? Take off the reduction of $1 from the original retail of $10. That gives us the net sales of $9. Well, it's a very easy way to think about it. All these things, you could write down as formulas, but if you can just understand their relationships, you can easily derive this type formula in your head when you are given certain problems. Let's continue to take a look at, like, for example, initial markup. Okay, initial markup $4 were calculated based on the original retail and cost, build cost, right? So original retail minus build cost would be equal to initial markup $, which we already learned in a previous module. Then maintained markup $, would be net sales minus build cost, right? Net sales minus cost in this case, so that would be $9 minus cost of $6 gave us the maintained markup of $3. That's another formula that we could write down. Another thing is, if you just look at the initial markup and maintained markup of $, initial markup $, was $4 and maintained markup is $3. The difference between these two markup dollars was derived from the reductions, right? So again, we can think about another formula such as initial markup equals $, equals maintained markup $, plus reductions, right? Or maintained markup $, equals initial markup $, minus reductions $. right? So there are a lot of the new formulas can be derived basically just by looking at this one example, a simple example. If you cannot think about the relationship between initial markup and maintained markup on cost, net sales reductions, and original retail, always go back and think about this one example diagram that will help you a lot in understanding their relationships. So here on this slide, we want to put together something like formulas for maintained markup percent, given what we learned from the previous slide. Okay, so the initial maintained markup percent formula would be maintained markup dollar over net sales. We already took a look at this formula before. Then in the previous slide, we saw that maintained markup is the difference between net sales and the cost. Right? Of course, originally the concept of maintained markup uses the gross cost, as I said before, which is build cost plus transportation. But if there was no transportation, then build cost is the gross cost. So we will end up using the same cost value for the initial markup and maintained markup calculation. So let's say this is the case where we don't have a transportation or very minimal transportation cost, so we can pretty much ignore it. In that case, maintained markup dollar will be net sales minus build cost. Okay, so if we can replace the maintained markup dollar portion of the previous formula with this concept, then maintained markup percent formula will be now net sales minus build cost over net sales. Then in the previous slides, we found that net sales is equal to original retail minus reductions, right? In the example from the previous slide, the net sales of $9 were calculated based on the original retail of $10 minus the reduction of $1, right? So we can replace the net sales portion of the previous MMU percent formula with the original retail minus reductions. That gives us the MMU percent formula of original retail minus reduction minus build cost over net sales, or we could even replace this net sale at the denominator with the original retail minus reductions as well. Now we also know the initial markup dollar is the original retail minus build cost. So if we utilize this concept and take a look at the previous formula again, then there's the original retail and then there's the build cost. So we can definitely replace this part with the IMU dollar. So that in that case, the MMU percent formula will become now IMU dollar minus reductions dollar divided by net sales dollar. Right? So all these four formulas, as well as any variations of them, okay, given the concepts or the relationships between the original retail net sales reductions and maintained markup and IMU dollars and all those things together that we saw from the previous slide, we can think about all kinds of variations of this MMU percent that formulas that can work. Okay, so it is more of the concepts that you have to understand what MMU actually mean. What's the maintained markup? What's the initial markup? The concept themselves and how the concepts are actually interplaying with their components, smaller components such as the net sales, original retail, reductions, and the initial markup and maintained markup. Those little components. Then you will be able to understand and be able to derive all kinds of different formulas and different ways to calculate maintained markup percent. So memorizing these formulas are great, but what's more important is understanding. So what was shown in the previous slide is really absolutely important, and if you can have a complete understanding of the points that I made in the previous slide, that will really help you a lot. Okay, so given all the concepts related to maintained markup that we just reviewed, let's work on this one example problem. Okay, so last year the dress department buyer purchased merchandise worth $140,000 at original retail, costing her $60,000. The department had total reductions of $15,000 last year. So what was the markup percent the buyer actually achieved? In other words, what is the maintained markup percent? Okay, let's pause the video here and work on the problem. Okay, so in a simple way to think about MMU percent is net sales minus cost over net sales. And we learned from the previous slide that the net sales can be replaced with the original retail minus reduction. In this case, we were given the original retail and reductions dollars in the problem, so it will be a lot easier if we can just utilize that concept. So original retail minus reductions minus build cost over original retail minus reduction will be MMU percent. So you plug in all the numbers that were given in the problem that will lead us to the final answer of 52% for the MMU of this department. Now here's another way to look at the relationship between the MMU and IMU. Sometimes we know the initial markup percent, IMU percent, planned out, and we may know reductions percent that we anticipate. Then based on that, we may sometimes be able to project what might be our MMU percent that will be achieved at the end of the season if we apply this IMU percent and this much of reduction percent is actually achieved. You know, that kind of scenarios. So when we project sometimes the MMU percent, we may utilize this concept of IMU percent, reductions percent. We should be able to do something with these two planned figures to anticipate or estimate what our estimated MMU percent may be. Okay, that formula comes from the concept of MMU percent being IMU dollar minus reductions dollar over net sales dollar, which we already took a look at in the previous, one of the previous slides. Then mathematically we can solve this so that that we will be able to derive a formula that simply tells us the relationship between IMU percent and MMU percent. Okay, let's take a look at the kind of mathematical process here. So the original formula of IMU dollar minus reductions dollar over net sales dollar can be converted into IMU dollar over net sales minus the reductions dollar over net sales, which is considered as reductions percent, right? And then from then on, we can multiply the first portion of the formula, IMU dollar over net sales dollar, the both denominator and numerator portion of that part of the formula, by multiply that by net sales plus reductions. Okay, and then it leads to the next stage where you can actually see the IMU dollar over net sales dollar plus reductions part that can be translated into IMU percent. And that times net sales dollar and net sales dollar, so that will be 100% plus the reduction dollar over net sales dollar, that will be reductions percent. And then you have the minus reductions percent there. And then we can translate this into IMU percent minus reductions percent times 1 minus IMU percent. You do not have to memorize all these step-by-step mathematical processes to reach the final formula, but we'll have to remember the final formula, which is MMU percent equals the IMU percent minus reductions percent times 100% minus IMU percent. So that is, you take a complement of IMU percent, 100% minus IMU percent, and you time that by reductions. Okay, that will be a small number, and that much has to be subtracted from the IMU percent to calculate the MMU percent. Okay, so here we go. If we have zero reduction, which means we don't take any markdown, sales discount, there's no shortages, etc., then the reductions percent will be 0%, which makes the entire bracketed portion to be 0. So in that case, the IMU percent equals MMU percent. Okay, and conceptually that makes sense, right? In one of the previous slides, we took a look at the diagram, and if we didn't have any reduction marked down, then our original retail will be our net sales. In that case, our MMU will be the same as our IMU, right? So that's why we call the bracketed portion of this formula, the reductions percent times 100% minus IMU percent, as the cost of reductions. Whenever we have a non-zero reduction, which means we have a reduction, okay, reduction in the retail price, markdown or discounts, or when we have a shortage, in that case, the MMU percent will be always smaller than the IMU percent. And how much is it smaller than the IMU percent? That is as much as the bracketed portion. Okay, So when you do apply this formula, you always have to do calculation in step by step. So you first have to take IMU percent, subtract that from 100%, do the parenthesized portion first, and then you multiply that by the reductions percent, and then subtract that answer from IMU percent to reach your MMU percent. If you mix up the order, then you're going to get the wrong answer. So be clear on the order or the calculation order and step-by-step process to reach the MMU percent based on the IMU percent and reductions percent plan that we already have. Okay, so then let's apply the last formula we just took a look at in this example problem. A department has the IMU percent of 52.2% and reductions of 12% planned out. Okay, if this is the case, then let's estimate the MMU percent. Let's pause the video here. Alright, let's see the answer together. So MMU percent equals IMU percent minus reductions percent times 100% minus IMU percent. So we applied the IMU of 52.2% and the reduction of 12% in this formula. Then you have to subtract 52.2 from 100%, that's 47.8. And time that by 12%, that gives us a 5.74%. And you subtract 5.74% from 52.2, and you will have the 46.46%. Okay. If any of you had a different answer than this, that's probably because you had a mistake in the calculation within the bracket. Okay, it usually typical error occurs when we try to multiply the reductions percent and 100% minus IMU percent. When you had 100 minus 52.2, you have 47.8 instead of 47.8%. And then when you try to just time that by 12 instead of 12%, you're going to have a huge number. Okay, for that the parenthesized portion, and then you subtract the huge number from 52.2, you're going to have probably a negative answer or something like that. That's because you didn't multiply the percent, the 12%, which is actually 0.12, and that might have happened in case you get the wrong answer. So be very careful when you apply this formula. Okay, it may be actually wise to use all decimals for everything, and then just at the last stage you just convert that decimal into percentage. Like so, instead of 52.2, just say 0.522 minus 0.12 times 1 minus 0.522. If you do that, and you will have a last chance to make a mistake, a calculation mistake. So make sure you just kind of understand that these are all percentage figures that we're looking at. Okay. So far we've thought about the relationship between the main tape markup and the initial markup. But let's now think about the relationship between the main tape markup and gross margin. Okay. In an earlier module, I explained that the markup directly impacts gross margin, right? The gross margin is an actual achieved figure in a sense that it is the difference between the net sales and cost of goods sold. Okay. A main tape markup is another achieved figure, right? It's the difference between the net sales and gross cost of merchandise sold, which is not the same as cost of goods sold. So main tape markup and gross margin are very similar but slightly different. Okay, but both are achieved figure, and we should be able to derive our gross margin based on the main tape markup. And gross margin is the ultimate goal that we want to maximize, and eventually will maximize the profit, right? So given that the main tape markup is the difference between net sales and gross cost, or the gross cost being the build cost plus transportation, and if we take a look at the difference between this gross cost and cost of goods sold, and that difference comes from the cash discount and alteration, because gross cost is the cost of goods sold prior to the consideration of the cash discount and alteration. So main tape markup is net sales minus parenthesis cost of goods sold plus cash discount minus alteration, and then parenthesized part is what we call the same as the gross cost, right? Given this, we can derive the relationship between the MMU and gross margin in a sense that MMU would be equal to gross margin, which is the net sales minus cost of goods sold portion of the previous formula, and minus cash discount plus alteration. Again, MMU equals GM minus CD cash discount plus alteration. And this formula or relationship applies in both dollar and percent because all these percentage will be percent of net sales. MMU percent will be gross margin percent, which is again percent of net sales, minus cash discount percent plus alteration percent. So from this formula, we can also think about how to get gross margin based on MMU. That will be that gross margin equals MMU plus cash discount minus alteration cost. Okay. Given these two formulas, then now we can think about a case where we don't have any cash discount or alterations cost. If we don't have any of those, then maintained markup will be equal to gross margin. Okay. So that's how sometimes we may not have a clear plan about what our cash discounts are going to be or what our alteration costs are going to be. Those things are less planned than kind of happens. In that case, that we can imagine and pretty much closely estimate our gross margin by knowing what our maintained markup is going to be. Right? So a lot of times we plan maintain markup based on our initial markup plan and reductions plan, and then knowing an estimated maintain markup gives us an idea about what our gross margin is going to be. Because a lot of times the merchandisers and line planners are dealing with gross margin, and their utmost goal is to maximize gross margin. And a lot of times they plan the gross margin based on what their maintain markup is going to be. Okay, so given what we just discussed, let's work on this final problem, example problem. Casual fashions had markdowns of 17.5%, shortages of 2.5%, alteration charges of 4%, cash discount of 6%, employee discount of 5%. And the store also uses an IMU percent of 50%. Okay. So the questions are what was the MMU percent and the GM percent. Let's first calculate the MMU percent based on the IMU percent of 50% and all the components of the reductions that were given, markdowns, shortages, and employee discounts to calculate the MMU percent. Cash discounts are not part of reductions, right? We talked about it. Customer discounts are part of reductions. Okay, as part of the sales discounts portion of the reductions. But cash discounts are what the vendor gives to the retailer. It's not a retail reduction. Okay. But the alteration charges and cash discounts are going to be used to derive the gross margin percent once you know what your MMU percent is. Okay, based on what we just discussed in the previous slide. Okay, so let's work on both problems. What's the MMU percent? What's the gross margin percent? Okay, let's pause the video here. Okay, let's take a look at the answer. Okay, we had to first know what the reductions percent is going to be in total, right? And we were given the markdown, shortage, and employee discount. There was no customer discount. So we just combined these three things together. That gave us 25% reductions. Okay. And MMU percent will be calculated based on IMU percent minus reductions times 1 minus IMU percent, 100% minus IMU percent. And we just use all the decimals just for the convenience of the calculation to avoid any errors. So that led us to a 37.5% MMU. Okay. If our maintained markup is 37.5%, and the cash discount was 6%, alteration costs were for 4%. In that case, our gross margin can be estimated by MMU percent plus cash discount percent minus alterations percent, and that gave us a 39.5% gross margin. Okay. Okay, great. So in this module, we took a look at the last type of markup called maintained markup. And this maintained markup was different from the previous two types of markup, initial markup and cumulative markup, in that the initial and cumulative markup were all planned markups that initially that we apply on our merchandise with the original retail price, whereas the maintained markup is an achieved markup figure based on the actual net sales that were made from the merchandise. So that sometimes you may have to take reductions from the original retail so that your net sales will be smaller than your original retail, and that had to be taken into consideration in the calculation of the maintained markup. Okay, so this concludes module number 8, and don't forget to work on module problem assignment number 8. All right, thanks for listening. Bye.